I was making soup when my daughter-in-law struck my head with a ladle. "Who cooks like that, you incompetent?" shouted Dawn, as I felt the hot metal searing against my temple. My son, Robert, sitting in the living room, simply turned up the volume on the television, as if he hadn't heard, as if it didn't matter. 5 minutes later, a deafening crash came from the kitchen. Pots, dishes, my body hitting the floor. Robert ran over and froze in the doorway. "Mum, what did you do?" he whispered, looking at me sprawled among the wreckage of my own dignity. But what neither of them knew in that moment was that I still had one last card hidden. A card that would change everything. My name is Helen. I am 71 years old, with hands calloused by decades of kneading bread for others, and a heart that until recently believed blindly in family loyalty. What a fool I was. How blind I had been. 6 months ago, I buried my husband, Henry. 50 years of marriage evaporated one April afternoon when his heart decided to give up while he was watering the geraniums in the backyard. I found him there, on his knees, the hose still dripping water onto his brown shoes. Since that day, my world became silence and yellowing photographs. I was left alone in a house that was too big, surrounded by memories that hurt to touch. Robert, my only son, insisted that I move in with him and his wife. "You can't be alone, Mum. At your age, it's dangerous." He sounded worried over the phone. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I packed my life into 4 suitcases and left behind the house where I raised my son, where Henry and I used to dance in the kitchen on Sundays, where every corner held pieces of us. Robert's house was modern, with gleaming floors and furniture that looked straight out of a magazine. Dawn, my daughter-in-law, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome, Helen," she said, without calling me mother-in-law, without calling me mum. Just Helen, as if I were a stranger. From the very first day, I knew I had made a mistake, but it was too late to go back. I settled into the guest room, a small room at the end of the hall, with a window that overlooked a dark alley. I hung Henry's photographs on the wall, neatly arranged my grey dresses in the closet, and tried to make myself invisible. That was my new role, existing without being in the way. Mornings began early. I got up at 6 o'clock, brewed coffee, made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, freshly squeezed orange juice. Robert came down first, always in a hurry, always looking at his phone. "Thanks, Mum," he would mumble without looking up. Dawn appeared later, wrapped in a green silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, even at that hour. She sat at the table and scrutinized every detail of my work with critical eyes. "The coffee is watery," she would say, "or the eggs have too much salt." Never a thank you, never an acknowledgement. I just nodded, smiled, and tried again the next day. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be needed. I wanted to believe I still had a place in my son's life. Days turned into weeks. I cleaned, cooked, did the laundry. I became a shadow moving through the house, picking up crumbs, folding towels, tidying spaces no one else saw. Dawn worked from home, always on important calls, always stressed. When something went wrong in her day, I was the easiest target. "Why did you leave this here?" she would yell at me, pointing to a cup I had forgotten on the side table. "You can't do anything right." Robert was present during these moments, but he never said a thing. He just looked the other way, as if it wasn't his problem, as if I wasn't his mother. There were nights when I stayed awake, listening to the wall clock tick every second. I wondered what I had done wrong. Where had I failed as a mother? Why did my son allow me to be treated this way? Tears fell silently onto my pillow, and I dried them before dawn because I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't give them a reason to get rid of me. But that afternoon, while I was preparing the vegetable soup that Robert loved so much as a boy, something broke. I was chopping carrots, focused on making everything perfect, when Dawn burst into the kitchen like a hurricane. "What are you doing?" she asked with that sharp voice I knew too well. "Soup for dinner," I replied softly without turning around. "Robert's favourite recipe." She moved closer, looked into the pot, and her face twisted in disgust. "This looks like pig slop. How much salt did you put in? Are you trying to poison us?" Her words were daggers. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She grabbed the ladle from the pot and, before I could react, slammed it against my head. The blow left me stunned. I felt the heat of the metal, the boiling liquid running down my hair, the sharp pain in my temple. "Who cooks like that, you incompetent?" Dawn screamed, her voice echoing throughout the house. I stumbled, holding onto the edge of the stove. From the living room, I heard the television. Robert was there. He could hear everything, and he just turned up the volume. That was the moment something inside me went out. The physical pain was nothing compared to the betrayal of that silence. My son, the boy I carried in my womb, whom I raised with every ounce of love I had, chose the sound of a TV show over my suffering. I stood there, leaning against the stove, the ladle still dripping soup at my feet. Dawn looked at me with those eyes full of contempt, waiting for me to apologize, to kneel, to beg her forgiveness for existing. But I could only think of Robert, of how the television volume had increased just as she screamed, of how he knew exactly what was happening and chose not to see it. "You're pathetic," Dawn spat, crossing her arms. "Look at this mess. You can't even make a damn soup. I don't know why Robert insisted on bringing you here. You're a burden, a useless person just taking up space." Every word was a slap. I wanted to answer, to defend myself, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my throat. I tried to clean up, to collect the drops of soup from the floor, but my hands were trembling. My head was throbbing where the ladle had hit. Dawn stormed out of the kitchen, and I was left alone amid the steam and the silence. 5 minutes. That was all it took for me to make a decision. I looked at the pots lined up on the stove. I looked at the dishes piled in the drainer. I looked at that kitchen that I had cleaned every day for months, trying to earn a place in this house that was never mine. And something inside me simply exploded. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated. It was pure survival instinct. I grabbed the largest pot, the one containing the soup she had criticized so much, and emptied it into the sink. The hot liquid ran down the drain with an almost violent sound. Then I grabbed another pot, and another. I let them fall. Some onto the floor, others against the kitchen counter. The plates slipped from my hands. The cups shattered. Cutlery flew through the air. It was a chaotic, liberating, necessary clamour. I heard Robert's hurried footsteps. "What was that?" he shouted from the hallway. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped dead. His face paled as he saw me there, surrounded by overturned pots, spilled soup, and broken dishes. There was a trickle of blood on my temple where the ladle had hit me. "Mum, what did you do?" he whispered. But he didn't come closer. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me as if I were to blame for everything. Dawn appeared behind him, and her expression of horror quickly turned to fury. "She's crazy. Your mother is completely insane," she shrieked, pointing at me as if I were a dangerous animal. "Look at this mess. She destroyed my entire kitchen. Call someone. Robert, this woman needs to be locked up." Robert looked at me. I looked back at him, hoping he would say something, that he would defend me, that he would at least ask why I had done this. But he just shook his head. disappointed, ashamed. Mum, why? Why do you do these things? Why? I repeated, and my voice sounded hoarse, broken. Your wife hit me with a boiling ladle. Robert, she hit me, and you turned up the television volume. The words came out like knives. He blinked, confused, or perhaps feigning confusion. I didn't hear it, Mum. I didn't. I didn't know what. Liar. The word hung between us like poison. You were there. You heard everything. And you chose to do nothing. Dawn stepped between us, her face red with rage. I won't tolerate this. I won't live under the same roof as this ungrateful old woman who respects nothing. Robert, you have to choose. Either she leaves, or I do. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I looked at my son, begging him with my eyes to choose me, to remember who raised him, who spent sleepless nights when he had a fever, who worked 2 jobs to pay for his college. But Robert was looking at the floor, his hands in his pockets, defeated. I'm sorry, Mum, he finally mumbled. But I think it's better if you look for somewhere else. This isn't working. You're causing problems. You need to leave. The world stopped. My heart stopped. Everything stopped. You're kicking me out? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Your wife hits me, and you kick me out. It's not like that, Mum. It's just that Dawn and I need our space. You need your independence. It will be better for everyone. He spoke in rehearsed phrases, empty words that someone else had put in his mouth. My son wasn't there anymore. Only a stranger with his face remained. When? I asked, feeling the tears start to burn behind my eyes. Tomorrow morning. I'll call you a taxi. You can stay in a hotel while you find something permanent. I'll help you with some expenses at first. He was dismissing me like an employee. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at Henry's photographs, wondering what he would say if he could see me now. I packed my things slowly, folding each item carefully, as if external order could contain the internal chaos. At dawn, I heard the taxi horn. Robert was waiting for me at the door with $200 in his hand. For you to settle in, he said, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't hug him. I didn't say goodbye. I just took the money, grabbed my suitcases, and left that house without looking back. The taxi driver asked me where I wanted to go. I had no answer. To any cheap motel, I finally told him. He took me to a place on the outskirts of Los Angeles, one of those roadside hotels with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled of dampness. The room cost $30 a night. I did the math in my head. With $200, I could survive for less than a week. The motel room was small, with stained beige walls and a bed that creaked every time I moved. There was a window overlooking the parking lot, where cars came and went at all hours of the night. The neon light of the sign flickered every few seconds, bathing everything in a sickly reddish glow. I sat on that bed and for the first time in months, cried without restraint. They weren't silent tears. They were deep sobs that came from some dark place in my chest, years of accumulated pain, swallowed humiliations, unspoken words. I cried for Henry, who had left, leaving me alone in a world I no longer recognized. I cried for Robert, the child who once hugged me and called me his hero. I cried for myself, for the woman I had been, and who now didn't know who she was. When the tears dried, only the emptiness remained. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, under the cruel fluorescent light. A 71-year-old woman stared back at me. Deep wrinkles, swollen eyes, messy grey hair. There was a purple mark on my temple where the ladle had hit me. I touched the wound gently and felt how the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the other pain, the one without a name. The days began to blur. I stayed in the room all the time, watching television without really seeing it, eating the bare minimum. I only went out to buy something from the vending machine in the hallway: salty chips, instant coffee, granola bars. Once, the machine swallowed my last $2 without giving me anything in return. I stood there, watching the money disappear, and felt it was a perfect metaphor for my life. I sent messages to Robert. At first, I tried to be dignified. "Son, I need to talk to you." Nothing. Then I tried to be more direct. "Robert, I'm running out of money." Silence. Finally, I stopped trying. The messages were marked as read, but there was never a response. It was like shouting into a bottomless pit. A week later, the money ran out. The motel receptionist, a man in his 40s with a prominent belly and tired eyes, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, I need you to pay or vacate the room." His voice wasn't cruel, just professional, indifferent. I explained my situation, begged for one more day, but he just shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Those are the rules." I packed my suitcases again, 4 suitcases that now weighed like corpses. I dragged them through the parking lot under a scorching sun, not knowing where to go. I walked for hours. My feet hurt. My hands had blisters from carrying so much weight, but I kept going because stopping meant accepting that I had nowhere to go. I ended up in a park near downtown Los Angeles. There were metal benches under the trees, pigeons pecking at crumbs, children playing on the swings. I sat on a secluded bench and watched life continue as if I didn't exist. A woman passed with her young daughter. The girl looked at me curiously, but her mother pulled her hand and quickened her pace, as if poverty were contagious. That was my first night sleeping on the street. I didn't really sleep. I stayed seated, clutching my purse, startled by every noise. There were other homeless people in the park, mostly men, who huddled under cardboard. One of them approached and offered me a piece of stale bread. "Eat it. Grandma, you have to be careful out here." I took the bread with trembling hands and thanked him. He nodded and walked away, dragging a bag full of cans. The days turned into a survival routine. I searched for food in the dumpsters behind restaurants. At first, I was disgusted. I was ashamed. But hunger is stronger than pride. I found day-old bread, bruised fruits, leftovers that people had left on their plates. I ate hidden in alleys where no one could see me. There was a church a few blocks away that served soup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I lined up with dozens of other people, all with broken stories written on their faces. A young volunteer served me the bowl with a compassionate smile that made me feel even smaller. "God bless you," she would say. I just nodded, unable to form words. Nights were the worst, cold, long, full of fear. I lay on the bench with my suitcases around me, using my sweater as a blanket. I heard distant sirens, occasional shouts, the constant hum of the city that never slept. I thought about Robert, lying in his comfortable bed, in his heated house, while I shivered under the stars. I wondered if he thought about me, if he cared, if he knew his mother was sleeping on the street. One morning, a police officer woke me with his flashlight. "Ma'am, you can't stay here. You have to move." I explained that I had nowhere to go. He sighed, tired of hearing stories like mine. "There's a shelter 6 blocks away. Go there." He gave me the address and left. I tried to go, but the shelter was full. "Come back early tomorrow," they told me. Always tomorrow. Always wait. Never now. 2 weeks passed like this. Or maybe 3. I lost count. The days blurred into a haze of exhaustion and hopelessness. My clothes were dirty, my hair greasy, my skin covered in grime. I had become one of those invisible people that everyone avoided looking at. A statistic, a shadow. But in the midst of all that suffering, something strange happened. I started to remember things I had forgotten. I remembered that before I married Henry, I wanted to study literature. I remembered that I once won a poetry contest in school. I remembered that there was a time when I had my own dreams before becoming a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a shadow. One afternoon, while searching through my suitcases for clean clothes, I found an envelope I didn't remember packing. It was old, yellowed, with my name written in Henry's unmistakable handwriting. My heart leaped. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and several folded documents. The letter began with "My dearest Helen." I immediately recognized when he had written it. It was from 2 years ago, when Henry had been hospitalized with pneumonia. I thought it had just been a scare, but now I understood that he had faced his own mortality. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you," the letter said. "Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive. I always wanted to shield you from the worries of money, of business, of legal complexities. But now I see it was a mistake to keep you in the dark." My eyes filled with tears as I read. Henry's voice resonated in every word. "For the last 30 years, I made investments, small at first, then larger. I bought properties when no one wanted them, in neighborhoods that later became valuable. I saved every extra cent. I did it all thinking about our future, about your security. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry, because I wanted to surprise you in our old age with the peace of mind of knowing you would be well taken care of." My breathing quickened. I unfolded the documents that accompanied the letter. They were deeds, property titles, investment certificates. My eyes scanned the papers, unable to believe what they were seeing. An apartment building downtown, another one in the northern area, company stocks, bank accounts with numbers that seemed impossible. My hands were trembling so much that the papers almost fell to the ground. I read each document once, twice, 3 times, trying to process the information. There were 13 properties in my name. 13. Entire buildings, apartments, commercial spaces, and one of those addresses was painfully familiar. Magnolia Street, number 452. It was the building where Robert and Dawn lived, the building where I had been kicked out, where I had been humiliated, hit, and discarded like trash, was mine. It had been mine all this time. I felt something churn in my stomach. It wasn't just surprise. It was a mixture of disbelief, pain, and something darker that was slowly beginning to grow. Henry's letter continued on the second page. "Contact the lawyer Roger Mendez. He has all the original documents and will help you with everything. His number is at the end of this letter. Helen, my love, never let anyone make you feel less than you are. You are a strong, capable, valuable woman. If someone treats you badly, remember that you have the power to defend yourself. I loved you every day of my life. Take care. Your Henry." I sat on that park bench, surrounded by my suitcases, holding the proof that I was not the destitute woman everyone saw passing by. I was the owner of an estate valued at millions of dollars. Millions. And I had been sleeping on the street, eating from the garbage, begging for crumbs. The irony was so brutal that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. I laughed like a madwoman as tears streamed down my dirty cheeks. People passing by looked at me with pity or fear, moving away from the crazy old woman in the park. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe I still was, but now I knew something they didn't. I searched through my things until I found a payphone that still worked. I dialed the number for the lawyer, Roger Mendez, with trembling fingers. It rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. Mendez and Associates Law Firm, how may I help you? I need to speak with the lawyer, Roger Mendez. It's about Henry Salazar. My voice sounded hoarse, broken from weeks of barely using it. There was a pause. Who is speaking, please? I am Helen Salazar, Henry's widow. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Salazar, we have been trying to contact you for months. Where are you? Mr. Mendez urgently needs to see you. I gave them the park's address. They told me they would send a car in less than 30 minutes. I returned to my bench and waited, clutching those documents as if they were the only real thing in the world. Maybe they were. The car that arrived was black, elegant, with tinted windows. The driver got out and looked at me with a neutral, professional expression, as if picking up homeless women were part of his daily routine. Mrs. Salazar? I nodded. He loaded my suitcases into the trunk and opened the back door for me. The interior smelled of leather and expensive air freshener. I felt dirty, out of place, but I didn't care anymore. The law firm was in the financial district, in one of those glass buildings that reflected the sky. We went up in a silent elevator to the 15th floor. The receptionist looked me up and down, but didn't say anything. She just pointed down a hallway. Mr. Mendez is waiting for you in his office. Roger Mendez was a man in his 50s, with perfectly combed grey hair and thin-rimmed glasses. He stood up when I entered, and for a second I saw surprise on his face at my state. But he quickly replaced it with a professional expression. Mrs. Salazar, please have a seat. I can offer you water, coffee. Water, please. My voice was barely a whisper. He poured a glass from a crystal carafe and handed it to me. I drank as if I hadn't had water in days, which was, in a way, true. Mrs. Salazar, we have been trying to locate you since Mr. Henry passed away. We left messages at your old house. We sent letters. Your son told us you had moved, but he didn't provide us with a contact address. My son. The words came out bitter. My son kicked me out of his house 3 weeks ago. I've been living on the street. The lawyer frowned. I understand. I am very sorry to hear that. But I want you to know that your financial situation is very solid. Your husband was an extremely foresightful man. Have you reviewed the documents he left you? I took the wrinkled envelope from my purse and placed it on the desk. I found them yesterday. I don't understand everything they say. Roger looked them over carefully. Ah, I see. These are duplicates. I have the certified originals here. Allow me to explain your current situation, Mrs. Salazar. You are the owner of 13 properties in the city, valued at approximately $8 million in total. Additionally, you have investments in funds and stocks, worth an additional $2 million. Your husband also left you 3 bank accounts with readily available cash of approximately $500,000. The numbers floated in the air like something unreal. $10 million. 10 million. And I had been searching for food in dumpsters. It can't be real, I whispered. It is completely real, Mrs. Salazar. And there's something else you should know. One of the buildings you own is on Magnolia Street, number 452. According to our records, your son Robert Salazar and his wife Dawn occupy apartment 301 in that building. That's correct. I nodded slowly. That's correct. Then you should know that they have been living there under a reduced rent contract that your husband granted them 5 years ago. They pay barely $400 monthly for an apartment that would be worth $2,500 on the market. It was a family favor that Mr. Henry granted them. $400. Robert was paying $400 to live in a luxury apartment thanks to his father's generosity. And he had kicked me out onto the street. He had left me with nothing. The lawyer continued speaking, explaining details about taxes, property management, but I barely listened. My mind was processing something else. "Can I cancel that contract?" I asked suddenly, interrupting him. Roger stopped and looked at me attentively. "You are the owner, Mrs. Salazar. You can do whatever you wish with your properties. However, there are legal procedures we must follow. You can't simply kick them out without notice." "I don't want to kick them out yet." The words came out cold, calculated. "I want them to adjust their rent to the market price, $2,500. You said. Have them pay that." The lawyer nodded slowly. "That is within your rights. We would have to notify them 30 days in advance about the change in contract terms. Are you sure you want to proceed?" "Completely sure." Roger took notes on his computer. "Very well. I will prepare the necessary documents. Now, Mrs. Salazar, there are more immediate matters we must attend to. Your housing situation, for example. You have several options. You can move into any of your unoccupied properties, or I can help you find a temporary place while you decide what to do." "I want to see the other buildings. All of them. I want to know exactly what I own." "Of course. We can organize visits starting tomorrow. In the meantime, allow me to arrange a hotel room for you, an appropriate place where you can rest and recover." He stood up and made a call. In minutes, everything was coordinated. A 5-star hotel downtown, executive suite, all paid for from my own account. Before I left, Roger handed me a bank card. "This has access to one of your checking accounts. There are $50,000 available for immediate expenses. Use what you need." "And Mrs. Salazar, one more thing. Your husband asked me to tell you something if you ever came to see me under difficult circumstances. He made me promise." He took a sealed envelope from a drawer. He told me, verbatim, "If my Helen comes to you beaten down by life, give her this and tell her that I always knew she was stronger than she thought she was." I took the envelope with hands that no longer trembled so much. I opened it right there, in front of the lawyer, Roger. It was another letter from Henry, this one shorter, written in black ink on thick paper. "My love, if you are reading this, it means someone hurt you enough that you sought help. I know your pride. I know how hard it is for you to ask for anything. But I want you to know one thing. I built all this for you. Every property, every investment, every penny saved was thought of for the day when I would be gone, and you would need to defend yourself. Don't let anyone, not even our own blood, make you feel small. You're a giant. Helen, you always were. Now prove it." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read. Roger had the delicacy to look away, pretending to review some papers. I folded the letter carefully and put it away with the other one. Henry had known. Somehow he had known that one day I would need this, that I would need a shield, an armor, a castle of my own. The hotel was everything my life had ceased to be. Soft carpets, sheets that smelled of lavender, a bathroom with a marble tub. I stood in the middle of the suite for several minutes, just looking. It seemed unreal. 24 hours ago I was sleeping on a park bench. Now I was in a room that cost $300 a night. The first thing I did was take a bath. I filled the tub with hot water to the brim and submerged myself completely. The water darkened with weeks of grime. I scrubbed my skin until it hurt, washed my hair 3 times, removing every trace of the street from my body. When I got out, I wrapped myself in a white robe that hung behind the door. It was so soft, it almost made me cry again. I ordered room service, soup, fresh baked bread, roast chicken, salad, dessert. When the food arrived on a cart with a white tablecloth, I sat down and ate slowly, savoring every bite. It wasn't just food, it was dignity. It was power. It was proof that I still existed as something more than a shadow. That night I slept 12 hours straight. I slept without being startled, without fear, without cold. When I woke up, the sun was coming through the curtains, and for a moment I didn't remember where I was. Then everything came back. The documents, the money, the properties, my new reality. For the next few days, Roger took me to see each of my properties. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, even a small shopping centre in the southern area. Each place represented years of Henry's silent work. Investments made with patience and vision. He explained how everything worked, the rental contracts, the maintenance, the monthly income. I listened and took notes like a diligent student. The net income from all your properties totals approximately $45,000 a month, he told me one day while we were reviewing reports in his office. After taxes and maintenance costs, you are looking at an annual income of about $400,000. That's without touching the principal capital. $400,000 a year. And I had been begging for a bowl of soup at church. The irony was still brutal, but now there was something else. A plan was forming in my mind. A cold, calculated, patient plan. Roger, I need us to make some changes, I told him one afternoon. But I need them to be done discreetly, without anyone knowing that I'm the one behind it. He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. What kind of changes? First, the building on Magnolia Street. I want to raise my son's rent to the market price, as we discussed. But I also want you to review all the other contracts in that building. If there are other special arrangements, reduced prices, favors being granted, I want everything to return to normal rates. Everyone. Everyone. I want that building to operate as a real business, not a charity organization. Roger nodded and took notes. It can be done. Anything else? I want to buy new clothes. I want to change my appearance. And I want a business name, something I can use to sign documents, to appear in contracts. I don't want anyone to know that Helen Salazar is the owner of all this. We can create a legal entity, an LLC. We choose a name, and all documents are signed under that name. You will be the hidden beneficiary. It's perfectly legal and very common in the real estate sector. Perfect. Call it Mendoza Enterprises. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed. I went to beauty salons where my hair was cut and dyed, covering the grey with an elegant brown. I went to boutiques where attentive staff helped me choose clothes that fit me well, that made me look like the woman of resources I now was. Pearl grey dresses, earth-toned pantsuits, dark green silk blouses. Nothing flashy. Everything classy. I bought new glasses with modern frames. I got a manicure. I learned to use a little makeup to cover the deepest wrinkles. I wasn't becoming someone else. I was finding the Helen who had been buried under years of silent service. Roger taught me to review financial reports, to understand bank statements, to make business decisions. I learned quickly, discovering a part of me that had never had a chance to develop. I had spent 50 years cooking and cleaning, but my mind was still sharp, capable, hungry for knowledge. You have a talent for this, Roger told me one day. Your husband chose his investments well, but you have an instinct for seeing opportunities. It's natural for you. Maybe it was. Maybe it always had been. But no one had ever given me the opportunity to discover it. Henry had been a good man, a loving husband, but even he had kept me in the dark about finances, believing he was protecting me. Now I understood that true power didn't come from being protected, but from having the tools to protect myself. The rent increase notices were sent to all tenants in the Magnolia Street building, signed by Mendoza Enterprises, legally represented by the Mendez and Associates law firm. The increases were justified, within legal limits, but they were significant, especially for those who had been paying reduced rates for years. Roger kept me informed of the reactions. Some tenants called furiously, others tried to negotiate. "There's one apartment in particular that has called 7 times," he told me one afternoon. Apartment 301, a Robert Salazar. He says he had a special contract with the former owner, that this must be a mistake. "It's not a mistake," I replied calmly. "Tell him the special contract expired with the death of Mr. Henry Salazar. He must now pay the full rate or vacate. He is asking to speak with the owner directly. Tell him the owner is unavailable. All communications must go through you." Days passed. Roger kept me informed. "Mr. Salazar is trying to get a loan to cover the new rent amount. Apparently, he and his wife are living beyond their means. They have credit card debt, a financed car. The rent increase is putting significant pressure on their finances." Good. The word came out cold, without emotion. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly, but I didn't feel guilt either. I was watching the natural consequences of the decisions Robert had made. He had chosen a wife who spent more than they earned. He had chosen to live in luxury that he could only afford, thanks to his father's generosity. He had chosen to kick his mother out onto the street. Now he was seeing the price of those choices. But I wasn't finished. There were other strings to pull, other levers to move. Dawn worked as an independent consultant from home. I did a little investigating using resources Roger provided me. I discovered that one of her main clients rented space in another one of my properties at the South Commercial Plaza. "Roger, this client who rents Unit 203 at the South Plaza, how much do they pay?" He checked his files. $2,200 a month. It's a large space. Good business. They always pay on time. Raise their rent to $3,500. That is a very significant increase, Mrs. Salazar. They might decide to move. Then let them move. It's my property, and I want to charge what it's worth. The client at Unit 203 did not move, but they did reduce their expenses. One of the first things they cut was contracts with external consultants, including Dawn. Roger informed me almost casually during one of our weekly meetings. "By the way, it seems your strategy is having side effects. The business at the South Plaza cancelled several vendor contracts. One of them was with Dawn Salazar, your daughter-in-law." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and continued reviewing other documents. But inside, I felt something akin to satisfaction. It wasn't revenge yet. It was justice. It was the universe readjusting, removing unearned privileges, balancing the scales. Weeks passed. I continued living in the hotel, studying, learning, transforming. I signed up for an online course on property management. I read books on personal finance that I had never had time for before. I met with other property owners that Roger knew, listening to their stories, absorbing their experience. One afternoon, while having coffee on the hotel terrace, Roger called me. "Mrs. Salazar, there's a situation you need to know about. Your son Robert requested a hearing with the building's management. He is 2 months behind on rent. Under standard policies, we have the right to initiate eviction proceedings." "How much does he owe?" $5,000 in total, plus late payment fees. $6,200 total. $6,200. I could have paid it with the money I had in my purse at that moment, but I wouldn't. "Proceed with the eviction, following all legal protocols, of course." "Are you sure?" "Once we start, the process is public. It is filed in the courts. It will appear on his credit history." "I am completely sure." That night I couldn't sleep. Not out of guilt or regret, but from a complex mixture of emotions that I didn't know how to name. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at the woman who stared back. She no longer looked like the one who had arrived at Roger's office 2 months ago. This woman had straight shoulders, a firm gaze, a jaw clenched with determination. This woman didn't beg. She didn't apologize for existing. This woman collected what she was owed. The following days were a whirlwind of legal activity. Roger kept me informed of every step. The eviction notice was delivered. Robert had 30 days to pay the full debt or vacate the apartment. According to Roger, my son had called the firm every day, sometimes several times a day, demanding to speak with the owner, asking for extensions, offering payment plans. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "What you instructed me to, that all policies apply equally to all tenants, that there are no exceptions, that if he cannot pay, he must vacate." Perfect. But there was something else Roger didn't know, something I had been investigating on my own. I hired a private investigator, not to spy, but to understand. I needed to know how my son had reached this point. I needed to understand what had happened to the boy I had raised. The report arrived a week later. It was sadder than I expected. Robert earned a decent salary as a sales manager, but Dawn spent 3 times what came in. Credit cards maxed out, personal loans to cover other loans, meals at expensive restaurants 5 times a week, designer clothes she wore once and forgot in the closet, a lifestyle built entirely on debt and appearances. The investigator also included notes on their relationship. They had had public arguments. Neighbors reported frequent shouting, doors slamming, tense silences. Dawn blamed Robert for not earning enough money. Robert blamed Dawn for spending too much. It was a vicious cycle of resentment and recriminations. I read the entire report twice. A part of me, the part that was still a mother, wanted to intervene. I wanted to call Robert, offer him help, guide him toward better decisions. But the other part, the newer, stronger part, knew that would be a mistake. Robert needed to hit rock bottom. He needed to face the consequences of his choices. Only then could he grow. Besides, he had let me hit rock bottom. He had seen me on his kitchen floor, bleeding, humiliated, and he had turned up the television volume. He had kicked me out onto the street with $200 and a vague promise of help. He hadn't called to check if I was alive. He hadn't asked if I had somewhere to sleep. He hadn't cared. That was the truth that hurt more than any physical blow. My son had stopped caring about me long before kicking me out of his house. Maybe he had never really cared. Maybe he only saw me as an obligation, an inherited burden that he had finally found a way to discard. On day 28 of the eviction period, Roger called me. Robert paid. He got the money somehow. He paid the full $6,200 this morning. I felt something akin to disappointment. Where did he get the money? I don't know for sure, but I have a theory. There is a new charge on the credit report I monitor. A personal loan from a quick loan company, 32% interest rate. He probably borrowed from there. 32% interest. Robert had exchanged one debt for a worse one. He had bought time, but he hadn't solved anything. I understand. Keep monitoring. Let me know of any changes. 2 weeks later, the next rent payment was due. Or rather, it didn't arrive. Robert was late again. This time, I didn't wait. Start the eviction process immediately, I told Roger. No additional warnings. We apply the rules to the letter. While all this was happening in the legal and financial world, I continued with my personal transformation. I signed up for yoga classes in the mornings, not because I needed exercise, although that helped too, but because I needed to learn to be silent with myself, to breathe, to exist without the constant noise of serving others. I also started writing. I bought a brown leather notebook and an elegant pen, and I wrote every night before bed. Not a diary exactly, but reflections, thoughts about who I had been, who I was now, who I wanted to be. I wrote about Henry, about our years together, about the things I never told him. I wrote about Robert, about motherhood, about how love is sometimes not enough. One afternoon, while writing on the hotel terrace, an elderly woman sat at the table next to mine. She must have been 80 years old, maybe more, with perfectly styled white hair and penetrating blue eyes. "Excuse me for bothering you," she said softly, "but I've seen you here several times, always writing, always alone, and you remind me of myself some years ago." I smiled politely, expecting it to be a preamble to selling me something or preaching to me, but she just continued. "I also went through a late transformation in my life. After my husband died, I discovered I didn't know who I was without him. I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, but never just myself, so I had to learn it. Is that your case too?" Her words struck me with uncomfortable precision. "Something like that," I admitted. "The hard part isn't discovering who you are," she said, looking toward the horizon. "The hard part is giving yourself permission to be it, especially when the person you discover is not who others expect you to be." She looked directly at me. "But it's worth it. Completely worth it." She stood up, patted me on the shoulder, and left. I never knew her name. I never saw her again, but her words stayed with me, resonating somewhere deep. She was right. The hard part wasn't discovering who Helen was without Henry, without Robert, without the role of the self-sacrificing mother. The hard part was giving myself permission to be that person, a person who collected what she was owed, a person who didn't automatically forgive, a person who set boundaries and made them be respected. The eviction process advanced relentlessly. Roger sent me updates every 2 days. Robert had hired a cheap lawyer who tried to find technicalities to delay the inevitable. They argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that certain protocols hadn't been followed, that they deserved more time. But Roger had done everything to the letter. Every document was in order. Every notification had been correctly delivered. There was no escape. "The eviction hearing is scheduled for next Thursday," Roger informed me one afternoon. "It's a formality. With the documentation we have, the judge will rule in our favor. Your son will have to vacate within a maximum of 10 days after the ruling." "I'll be there," I said suddenly. Roger raised his eyebrows, surprised. "At the hearing? It's not necessary, Mrs. Salazar. I can represent you completely. In fact, it's better if you're not present. It maintains your anonymity. I want to be there, in the room, but not as an involved party, just as an observer." "You can." He thought for a moment. "Eviction hearings are public. Anyone can enter and sit in the back benches. As long as they don't recognize you, there's no problem." Thursday arrived with a grey sky that threatened rain. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark grey pantsuit and an ivory silk blouse. I tied my hair back in a low bun. I put on my new glasses, a little subtle makeup. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman Robert wouldn't recognize. I was no longer the stooped mother cooking soup in his kitchen. I was someone else, someone stronger. The courthouse was an old building with hallways that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I arrived early and sat on the last bench in courtroom 3, where the hearing would take place. There were other people waiting for their own cases, all with that anxious, tired expression that the legal system produces. Robert arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time. He came with Dawn and their lawyer, a young man in a suit that had seen better days. My son looked terrible. He had lost weight, had deep dark circles, his hair was messy. Dawn, on the other hand, was perfectly groomed, in an emerald green dress that was too elegant for a courthouse, high heels, impeccable makeup. But her expression was one of barely contained fury. They sat in the front, their backs to me. I observed them as one watches a play, distant, analytical. Dawn whispered things into Robert's ear, making abrupt gestures, clearly annoyed. He just nodded, defeated, without the energy to argue. Their lawyer reviewed papers with a worried expression. Roger arrived exactly on time, immaculate in his black suit, leather briefcase in hand. He didn't look at me, just as we had agreed. He sat on the other side, organized, confident. He knew his trade and knew he had a solid case. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, with a severe expression and efficient movements. Case number 3478, Mendoza Enterprises versus Robert Salazar, the clerk announced. Robert's lawyer stood up first. He argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that his client had lived in the apartment for 5 years with a good payment history, that he deserved special consideration. His voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. He knew he was losing. Roger stood up calmly. He presented the documents, the original contract, the increase notifications, the late payment notices, all perfectly organized. He explained that the special contract had been a courtesy of the former owner, now deceased, and that the new management had decided to normalize all rents to the market price. Completely legal, completely justified. Furthermore, Your Honor, Roger continued, the defendant not only refused to pay the new rent amount, but accumulated 2 months of arrears. He paid under eviction pressure on one occasion, but immediately fell back into delinquency. This demonstrates a pattern of inability or unwillingness to fulfill his contractual obligations. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. She looked at Robert. Mr. Salazar, is it correct that you currently owe 2 months' rent under the new terms? Robert stood up with difficulty. Yes, Your Honor, but the increase was so sudden. We didn't have time to adjust. If you could give us an extension, just 3 months to— Mr. Salazar, the judge interrupted him firmly. You were notified 30 days in advance of the change in terms, which is what the law requires. You had sufficient time to adjust or find another place. Do you have the money owed at this moment? Robert looked at his lawyer, then at Dawn, then at the floor. No, Your Honor, not at this moment. Then I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Salazar, you have 10 days to vacate the property. If you do not do so voluntarily, forced eviction will proceed. Next case. The gavel struck the table. Everything had ended in less than 20 minutes. Robert remained paralyzed in his place, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. Dawn exploded. This is unfair. You can't do this. We have rights, she yelled toward the judge. But it was too late. The next case was being announced. Their lawyer took her arm, trying to get her out of the courtroom before she was charged with contempt. Dawn resisted, shouting incoherent things about corruption and abuse. Robert followed her in silence, dragging his feet, the very image of defeat. They passed by my bench without looking at me. I was just another person in the room, invisible, irrelevant. I watched them until they left. Then I stayed seated for a few more minutes, letting the reality sink in. I had won. Legally, formally, I had won. But I didn't feel the euphoria I expected. Just a kind of emptiness, like after a storm. I left the courthouse through a side door. Roger had told me he would wait for me at a nearby coffee shop. I found him at a back table, with 2 cups of coffee already served. Well, he said when I sat down, it went as planned. Yes. How do you feel? I thought about the question. How did I feel? Strange, I finally admitted. Like I closed a door, but I still don't know what's on the other side. Roger nodded with understanding. What you did today wasn't cruel, Mrs. Salazar. It was just fair. Your son made decisions that led him here. You simply let him face the natural consequences of those decisions. I know. Rationally, I know, but that never changes. Not even when they change. We drank coffee in silence. Roger didn't push me to talk more. He was good at that, at knowing when silence was more useful than words. After a while, he took a folder from his briefcase. I have to show you something. It arrived this morning, a request from one of your other tenants in the Magnolia building. I opened the folder. It was a handwritten letter, addressed to Mendoza Enterprises. It was written by a woman named Martha Gomez, tenant of apartment 105. She explained that she was a single mother with 2 children who worked as a nurse on the night shift and had always paid her rent on time. She asked, very respectfully, if it was possible to reconsider the rent increase in her case, or at least stagger the increase over several months. She attached copies of her payment receipts, proof of income, reference letters from her employer. I read the letter twice. What do you think? I asked Roger. It's your decision. Legally, you are not obligated to make exceptions, but this woman seems genuine, and she has an impeccable payment history. I thought about Martha Gomez, whom I didn't know, working night shifts to support her children. I thought about how many times I had been in her position, begging for a little consideration, a little grace. Accept her proposal, stagger the increase over 6 months, and tell her that if she continues to pay on time, we will consider keeping her rent below market permanently. Roger smiled slightly. That is very generous. It's not generosity. It's recognizing the difference between someone who is genuinely struggling and someone who is just evading responsibility. I signed the approval right there. It was a line I had decided to draw. I would be tough on those who had hurt me, on those who abused unearned privileges. But I wouldn't become the type of person who ignores real suffering. I wouldn't become Dawn. The following days were tense. Roger informed me of Robert's desperate attempts to reverse the decision. He had appealed the ruling, which would only delay things by 1 more week. He had tried to get additional loans, but his credit was already ruined. He had placed ads selling furniture, electronics, anything of value. The appeal was rejected in 3 days. The appeals judge didn't even require a hearing, just reviewed the documents and confirmed the original ruling. Robert now had less than a week to vacate. According to the private investigator who was still monitoring the situation, my son and Dawn had begun packing, but the arguments between them had intensified dramatically. Neighbors report shouting every night, the investigator informed me by phone. Yesterday, Mrs. Dawn left the building with 2 suitcases and took a taxi. She hasn't returned. Apparently she's staying with a friend. And Robert? He's still there, alone, packing. One of the neighbors says they saw him crying in the hallway last night while carrying boxes to the elevator. The image hurt more than I expected. My son, alone, crying while packing the remnants of his life. But I didn't call. I didn't intervene. This had to happen. He needed this breaking point. 2 days before the eviction deadline, Roger received an unexpected call. It was Robert, he told me when we met that afternoon. He wants to speak with the building owner. He says he has something important to say. He's begging for a meeting. What did you tell him? That I would relay the message. He wants to see you. The question hung in the air between us. Did I want to see my son? Did I want to hear what he had to say? A part of me, the part that never stopped being a mother, screamed it yes. But the other part, the wiser part, had doubts. Do you know what he wants to say? No, only that it's important, that he needs to explain something. I thought for a long minute. Tell him I will agree to see him, but not as his mother, as the representative of Mendoza Enterprises, and it has to be in a neutral place, in your office, tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Roger nodded. Does he want me to be present? No, I have to do this alone. That night I didn't sleep. I mentally practiced what I would say, how I would react. I stood in front of the mirror and rehearsed maintaining my expression neutral, firm, without betraying emotion. I had to be strong. I couldn't allow Robert to see the mother desperate for his love. He had to see the businesswoman I now was. At 2:30 the next afternoon, I arrived at the law firm. Roger had let me use his private office. I sat behind the desk, in the black leather chair, with the case documents in front of me. I was dressed impeccably. Charcoal grey pantsuit, cream-coloured blouse, hair perfectly styled, subtle but definitive makeup. I didn't look like Helen. I looked like Mrs. Mendoza. At exactly 3 o'clock, I heard voices in the reception area. My heart started beating faster. The door opened, and Robert entered alone. He stopped dead when he saw me. For an infinite moment, we looked at each other in silence. I saw his brain processing what his eyes were seeing. Confusion first, then disbelief. Finally, absolute shock. "Mum?" he whispered, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Sit down, Robert." My voice came out cold, controlled. It wasn't the voice of a mother. It was the voice of an owner. He stumbled toward the chair in front of the desk, unable to take his eyes off me. "No, I don't understand. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like this? Where have you been? I looked for you. Mum, I called you. I sent you messages." Lies. The word cut the air like a knife. I checked my messages. 0 calls, 0 messages. After kicking me out of your house, you never contacted me again. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes filled with tears. Dawn said it was better to give you space, that you were angry, that with time. Dawn said, I repeated with an icy tone. Robert, since when did you let your wife make decisions about your relationship with your mother? It wasn't like that. Things were complicated. Money, work, Dawn was stressed. And it was easier to forget about me than to deal with your wife. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He lowered his gaze, unable to deny it. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Robert looked up, and I saw something different in his eyes. A question forming. Mum, what are you doing here, in this office, dressed like this? Why did the lawyer let you use his office? I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I'm not using his office, Robert. He lent it to me because I am his client. I am Mendoza Enterprises. The color drained from his face. What? The building where you live, the other 12 buildings in this city, the investments, the money, it's all mine. Your father left it to me. It was always mine. And you have been paying rent to live in my property. Robert stood up so fast that the chair almost fell over. No, that's not. Dad never mentioned. Why didn't you say anything? Why would I have said anything? My voice rose slightly, allowing a little of the contained anger to surface. So you and Dawn could treat me like your landlady in addition to your maid? So you could ask for more favors, more discounts, more special considerations? We didn't know, he shouted. If we had known that you… What? I interrupted him, standing up as well. Would you have treated me better? Would you have respected me more? Robert, respect shouldn't depend on how much money someone has. I was your mother. That should have been enough. He fell back into the chair, his head in his hands. His shoulders trembled. He was crying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mum. I was a coward. I let Dawn treat you badly. I let her kick you out. I turned up the television volume when she was hurting you because I didn't want to confront her, because it was easier to sacrifice you than risk my marriage. The words I had waited months to hear had finally come out of his mouth, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I only felt tired. And now, Robert, do you only feel sorry because you discovered I have money? Because I own the building where you live? Would you have come to apologize if you still thought I was a poor old woman with no resources? He looked up, his face soaked with tears. I don't know, he admitted with a broken voice. I don't know, Mom, and that's the worst part. I don't know what kind of person I became. I don't recognize the man who did those things, who left his mother on the street, who chose comfort over decency. At least he was honest. That was something. I sat down again, calmer. Your marriage is falling apart, isn't it? He nodded miserably. Dawn left 3 days ago. She says she won't stay with a loser who can't even pay the rent. She says she deserves better, that all this is my fault. And what do you think? I think she's right. I think I am a loser. I lost my job 2 weeks ago. I was fired for being constantly late, for being distracted, for the stress. I have debts of over $40,000. My credit is ruined. And in 2 days, I'm going to be homeless. It's ironic, isn't it? I left you homeless, and now I'm in the same situation. It's not ironic, I said softly. It's karma. He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Have you come to watch me suffer? Is that what you wanted? Revenge. The question stopped me. Was that what I wanted? I had spent weeks moving pieces, pulling strings, applying pressure. I had watched my son fall apart, piece by piece. And now that he was here, in front of me, completely broken, did I feel satisfied? No, I finally said, surprised by my own answer. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be discarded, ignored, treated as if you're worth nothing. I wanted you to hit rock bottom so you could start rebuilding yourself correctly. And did I achieve it? He asked with a voice barely audible. I hit rock bottom. What do you think? He thought for a long moment. I think so. I think I can't fall any lower than I am now. No job, no wife, no money, no home, no dignity. Without you. The last 2 words came out as a torn whisper. I remained silent, letting his words float between us. Robert had reached the bottom. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped, in how his hands trembled on his knees. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment my son finally understood the weight of his actions. Do you know what the worst part of it all was, Robert? I finally said. It wasn't the blow with the ladle. It wasn't sleeping on the street. It wasn't searching for food in the garbage. It was the sound of the television volume going up. It was knowing that my own son heard me cry out in pain and chose to do nothing. He sobbed, covering his face with his hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I could go back in time. But you can't, I interrupted him. No one can. We can only decide what to do with the time we have left. Robert looked up, hope and fear mixed in his expression. What? What's going to happen now? I leaned back in the chair, studying him. My son. the baby I had carried in my arms, the child who ran to me when he fell, the teenager who hugged me before going off to college. All that was still there, buried under bad decisions and cowardice. But there was also the man who had betrayed me. Both versions were real. "The eviction proceeds," I said firmly. "I am not going to cancel it. You need to leave that apartment. You need to leave that life behind." His face crumbled. "I understand. I have no right to ask you for anything. Just, can I ask you something? Where were you all those months? How did you survive before you discovered the properties?" I told him. Not everything, but enough. The nights in the park, the hunger, the cold, the machine that swallowed my last dollars. Every word was a dart that I watched embed itself in him. He needed to hear it. He needed to understand the full cost of his abandonment. When I finished, Robert was openly weeping, not trying to hide it. "I failed you in the worst possible way. Dad must be ashamed of me. Wherever he is, he must hate me for what I did to you." "Your father loved you," I said softly, "even when you made mistakes. But he also knew that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. That's why he built this legacy for me, so I would have the resources to defend myself if I ever needed to." "Will you ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air. The truth was, I didn't know. "I don't know, Robert. Forgiveness isn't something I can force. It's not a switch I flip because you finally apologized. It's a process. And first, I need to see real change, not just pretty words born of desperation." He nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "What can I do? How can I show you I've changed?" "It's not about showing me anything. It's about you becoming the man you want to be, the man your father would have been proud to call his son." I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "You have 2 days to vacate. Use that time wisely." Robert stood up slowly, as if every movement cost him enormous effort. At the door, he stopped and turned around. "Mum, one last thing. When I find somewhere to stay, when I manage to get my life sorted out, can I call you? Even if it's just to know you're okay?" I thought about my answer carefully. "You can try, but I don't guarantee I'll answer. Not until I see actions, not just words." He nodded, accepting the terms. "Thank you for seeing me, for listening to me. I know I didn't deserve it." And he left. I was left alone in the office, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It hadn't been the explosive confrontation I might have imagined. There were no screams or dramatic rejections, just the cold, hard truth, served on a platter of inevitable consequences. The following days were spent in a kind of emotional limbo. Roger informed me that Robert had vacated the apartment one day before the deadline. He had left the place clean, the keys correctly handed over. According to the building doorman, he had left in a taxi with only 3 suitcases and an expression of total defeat. "Do you know where he went?" I asked, hating myself for asking. "No, Mom. He didn't say." A part of me wanted to investigate, find out where he was, make sure he at least had a roof over his head. But I held back. Robert was an adult. He needed to sort this out himself. I couldn't keep rescuing him. Dawn, for her part, had completely disappeared. According to my sources, she had moved back in with her parents in another city, blaming Robert for everything. She had posted things on social media about weak men and wasted time, but never mentioned her own role in the disaster. Typical. With the apartment vacant, I decided to make changes. I hired a designer, and we completely renovated the space. New floors, fresh paint, modern appliances. Apartment 301 became the jewel of the building. I rented it in less than a week to a young professional for $3,000 a month. But the building wasn't the only thing that needed renovation. I did too. I decided it was time to leave the hotel and create a real home. I chose one of my properties, a small house in a quiet neighborhood with a garden that faced south. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with large windows, and a wooden deck perfect for mornings. I spent weeks decorating it. I didn't hire designers this time. I wanted to do it myself. I chose simple but elegant furniture. I hung Henry's photographs in the living room, but I also left space for new memories. I planted roses in the garden, tomatoes in pots, aromatic herbs next to the kitchen window. I enrolled in painting classes at a nearby community center. It turned out I wasn't terrible. My first attempts were disastrous, blobs of color without shape or meaning. But over time, I started creating things I liked. Simple landscapes, still lifes, self-portraits that captured who I was becoming. I also started volunteering at the shelter I had tried to visit that terrible night when I had nowhere to go. I served food twice a week. I listened to the stories of other homeless people, understanding that each one had their own path to despair. I donated generously, but I also gave something more valuable: my time and my empathy. One afternoon, while serving soup, I recognized someone. It was the man who had offered me bread that night in the park. He looked cleaner now, more hopeful. "Grandma," he said, surprised. "Is that you? You look different." "I am," I replied, smiling. I found myself. 3 months passed without news of Robert. He didn't call. He didn't write. Part of me was relieved. Another part felt his absence like a wound that wouldn't close. But I kept going. I continued building my life, discovering who Helen was beyond being a mother, a wife, a shadow. Then, one Saturday morning, while watering the roses, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Mum." Robert's voice, but different, firmer. "It's me. I know you said you might not answer, but I needed to try." My heart beat faster. "Where are you?" "In a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy. Just a studio. But it's mine. I pay for it with my new job. I'm working in a warehouse, night shift. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I'm paying off my debts, little by little." I felt something loosen in my chest. "I'm glad to hear that." "Mum, I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm going to therapy. Every week. I'm working on understanding why I made the decisions I did. Why I let Dawn turn me into someone I don't recognize." "That's good, Robert. Really good." There was a pause. "Do you think someday could we maybe get a cup of coffee? It doesn't have to be soon. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready." I looked at the roses I had planted, now blooming in coral and yellow tones. I looked at the house I had turned into my sanctuary. I looked at the life I had built from the ashes. "Maybe," I finally said. "Someday, when we are both ready." "Okay, I can wait. I've learned to be patient." His voice cracked slightly. "I love you, Mum. I know I don't have the right to say it after everything, but it's true." "I know," I whispered, and I hung up. I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, letting the morning sun warm my face. I hadn't completely forgiven Robert. Maybe I never would entirely. But there was something more important than forgiveness. I had found peace. I had found my strength. I had found my voice. I took out my notebook and wrote. I learned to forgive myself for waiting so long to defend myself. I learned that self-love is not selfishness. It is survival. It is dignity. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. The wind rustled the leaves on the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. And I, Helen Salazar, 71 years old, owner of 13 buildings, survivor of betrayal and abandonment, a woman reborn from her own ashes, simply existed. Whole. Free. Mine.